Every event has meaning, the Buddhist path to inner peace. There is a certain hush that appears in life when we begin to suspect that nothing that happens is random. It is not the superstitious hush of trying to decode omens or force patterns where there are none. It is the quiet, lucid recognition that the mind is a field of causes and conditions, and that our experience, moment by moment, is shaped by what we attend to, how we understand, and how we respond. Buddhism invites us into that recognition. It does not promise that pain will disappear or that life will suddenly organize itself around our preferences. It promises something subtler and more revolutionary. That meaning is available in every event, because every event can become a site of awakening. Meaning in this sense is not a story we impose on reality. It is a quality of presence we bring to reality, an intimacy with what is. To step onto the Buddhist path is to step into a training in seeing clearly. We learn that suffering has a logic and a trajectory. It emerges from causes, clinging, aversion, ignorance, and it dissolves when those causes are understood and released. We learn that joy has a logic too. It emerges when the heart is unencumbered, when the mind is steady, when compassion is allowed to flow without the choke of fear. The claim that every event has meaning is not a metaphysical assertion about fate micromanaging our lives. It is a practical assertion about the mind's capacity to meet whatever arises with wisdom and love. The meaning of an event, then, is discovered in the work it invites us to do. Can we see the craving beneath the irritation? Can we feel the fear beneath the anger? Can we recognize the tenderness beneath the defenses we've carried for years? Can we remain with the breath when the body would rather run, the tongue would rather lash out, or the mind would rather hide? The great promise here is freedom. Not the freedom of controlling outcomes, but the freedom of responding rather than reacting. The freedom of understanding our habits so exquisitely that we are no longer dragged by them. The freedom of being at peace in a world that changes constantly. Buddhist practice gives us concrete methods: mindfulness, ethical living, right effort, concentration, insight, to transform daily life into a field of practice. A frustrating conversation becomes a mirror that reveals the subtle texture of our attachment to being right. An unexpected loss becomes a teacher that brings impermanence out of abstraction and into the bloodstream. A kind word becomes a signal of interdependence, reminding us that our well-being is braided with others. To find meaning in events is not to romanticize suffering or deny injustice. It is to meet suffering with clarity and to meet injustice with compassionate courage. It is to understand that the mind which sees clearly is already participating in healing, and it is to realize that the simplest things, washing a cup, answering an email, stepping into sunlight, are opportunities to practice presence, kindness, and non-grasping. When we practice in this way, inner peace ceases to be a distant ideal and becomes a daily, embodied competence. It becomes the texture of our attention, the tone of our speech, the softness in our gaze, the steadiness in our breath. The path is not elsewhere, it is under our feet. Mindfulness and dependent origination, how meaning emerges in each moment. If we are to understand how every event can hold meaning, we must understand how experience itself arises. The Buddha's teaching of dependent origination points to a profound simplicity. This arises, that becomes, this ceases, that ceases. Nothing appears in isolation. A flare of anger is not an isolated explosion. It is the culmination of conditions. Fatigue, a remembered slight, a certain tone of voice, a fear of not being respected, a body already tense from a day of rushing. Likewise, a moment of quiet joy is not a gift dropped from the sky. It is the convergence of rest, a mind not scattered, the touch of a breeze, the ease that comes when we are not trying to be elsewhere. When we see this, we stop treating our moods and reactions as mysteries or as fixed identities and start treating them as processes. A process can be studied. A process can be understood. A process can be gently altered. Mindfulness is the instrument of this study. It is a calm, non-judging awareness that tracks the unfolding of our inner life as it occurs. The awareness is simple. This is the in-breath, this is the out-breath, but its implications are immense. With mindfulness, we can see the birth of a thought, feel how it gathers allies, and notice how it begins to contract the body. We can watch the first ripple of irritation when someone speaks sharply and notice the instant in which the mind leaps to defend itself. Between that ripple and that leap there is space, and in that space there is freedom. When we occupy that space, the event is no longer an insult forcing us into anger. It becomes an invitation to look at the habit that makes anger feel inevitable. Meaning emerges because we are present enough to learn. Meaning, then, is not a story we later attach to an event in order to feel better about it. Meaning is brought forth in real time by our quality of attention. When a difficult email arrives, mindfulness notes the quickening heart, the heat in the face, the tightening jaw. It notes the script that begins to run. I must answer perfectly. They don't value me. This always happens. Mindfulness does not argue with these scripts. It recognizes them as protective strategies born of past experiences. Seeing them clearly, we can breathe, soften the belly, feel our feet, and return to what is needed now. The email becomes an opportunity to practice kindness toward ourselves and clarity toward others. The event is meaningful because it trains our character. This training has layers. On the first layer, we simply reduce harm. We learn to pause before speaking, to notice the urge to send a reactive message, to question the voice that demands we prove ourselves. On the second layer, we refine perception. We learn to notice not just the gross sensations, but the subtle ones, the tiny clench in the throat when we think we're about to be judged, the micro-relief when someone praises us. We begin to understand our reward systems, our triggers, the histories that color the present. On the third layer, insight flowers. We see impermanence not as a doctrine, but as a direct perception. This feeling arises, peaks, dissolves. This thought is a cloud. This identity shifts. The sense of I as a fixed entity softens. When I softens, compassion expands, because we are less invested in defending an idea of ourselves and more able to care for the shared vulnerability of being human. Dependent origination also rescues us from a crushing moralism that imagines we should be able to snap our fingers and be different. If our reactions are processes conditioned by countless factors, then transformation is not an act of brute will. It is the art of tending conditions. We adjust sleep, nutrition, speech, company, media, diet, the way we schedule our days, the practices we keep. We learn to plant seeds of well-being, gratitude, generosity, patience, so that when storms arrive, they blow through a landscape already rooted. We learn that certain conversations are better after a walk, that certain decisions are better after meditation, that certain topics require our most rested self. This is not rigidity, it is wisdom about timing and context. Meaning is found when we tailor our responses to the truth of conditions, rather than to the fantasy that we are supposed to be invulnerable. Consider grief. Without mindfulness, grief can feel like a non-negotiable flood that erases the horizon. With mindfulness, grief remains a flood, but we notice its currents. We notice the moments of breath between waves, the quiet minutes when the ache loosens, the sudden softness when we remember a kindness from the one we lost. These spaces are not betrayals of our love. They are confirmations that even in grief, change continues, and in change, possibility remains. The meaning here is not that loss is for the best. The meaning is that love continues to teach us how to live, even when it hurts. The event, loss, becomes a teacher because we are willing to learn from it without forcing it to be anything other than what it is, or consider success. Without mindfulness, success can inflate the ego and intensify fear. Now we must protect what we have. With mindfulness, success becomes another practice field. We learn to receive appreciation without addiction, to celebrate without clinging, to acknowledge effort without building a temple to the self. We note the urge to secure status, and we breathe through it. We remember that our worth is not exhausted by outcomes, and we redirect a portion of our gain toward generosity. In this way, success itself acquires meaning because it becomes a vehicle for deepening humility, gratitude, and service. At the heart of all this is intimacy with the present moment. The mind often tries to outsource meaning to the future. When I get there, then it will all make sense. Buddhism gently refuses that bargain. It insists that sanity is available now, that meaning is not a distant prize, but a function of how we relate to reality in real time. We practice bringing the mind home to the body, resting attention in the breath, feeling the contact points of the feet on the floor, the weight of the hands, the air on the skin. From this groundedness, we open to sound, sight, sensation, thought, mood. We do not try to manage them, we befriend them. The more intimate we become with this simple aliveness, the more clearly we see that events are not interruptions. They are the fabric of the path. This intimacy changes how we speak. Much of our suffering is recycled in language, complaints that rehearse injury, stories that fix our identity as the injured or as the righteous. Mindfulness lets us feel, before we speak, whether our words will coagulate pain or free it. In a tense conversation, we might notice the impulse to win and choose instead to reveal our vulnerability. When you speak that way, I feel small and I close. I want to stay open with you. The event, the conflict, becomes a doorway to truth-telling and connection. This is not passivity. It is a courage anchored in presence. It is the courage to inhabit the body while we speak, to feel the shaking and not flee, to let the breath carry the heart's truth through the narrow places. As this practice deepens, we begin to sense the spaciousness that Buddhist teachers call emptiness, not a void, but the freedom of phenomena to be exactly what they are, without the overlays we habitually add. An event loses its heavy solidity. It is seen as a dance of causes and conditions, and in that seeing, reactivity loosens. The email is no longer my doom. It is text on a screen, plus bodily sensations, plus learned fears that can be met and soothed. The praise is no longer my proof. It is sound in the air, plus warmth in the chest, plus a story that can be enjoyed without being believed. Emptiness in this sense is the ultimate source of meaning, because it frees us to participate in life without the distortions that make us strangers to ourselves. Finally, mindfulness teaches us reverence for the ordinary. The mind imagines that meaning resides only in dramatic moments. But the cup in your hand, the rhythm of your steps, the sound of rain, these are the exact places where the heart learns to be at ease. When we wash the cup with attention, we are training the mind to be one with what it is doing. We are knitting the scattered strands of self into a single quiet thread. This simplicity is not a retreat from the world, it is the basis for wise action in the world. A mind at ease can see what needs to be done and can do it without the friction of self-concern. In this way, the smallest events become living instruction, and the path to inner peace is walked with an ordinary grace. If this first step on the path spoke to you, and you want more teachings and practices like these, subscribe to the channel now and share this journey with those who need it. Suffering as a teacher, the transformative meaning, hidden in pain. When we hear the word suffering, the natural impulse is to recoil. We want to avoid it, fix it, silence it, or distract ourselves from it. Yet the Buddha's first noble truth does not sweep suffering under the rug. It places it right at the center. Life involves dukkha, often translated as suffering, dissatisfaction, or unease. This acknowledgement is not pessimism, it is honesty. But what matters most is how we relate to that honesty. If every event has meaning, then even suffering, perhaps especially suffering, must carry a potential for awakening. The challenge is to meet pain, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a teacher to be listened to. Suffering can appear in countless forms. The grief of losing someone we love, the restlessness of never feeling enough, the anxiety of uncertainty, the sting of betrayal, the weariness of repetition. Each of these, if met unconsciously, can harden the heart and deepen the grooves of resentment or despair. But if met with mindfulness and compassion, they can reveal truths that liberate. The pain of loss shows us impermanence in its most undeniable form. The ache of longing shows us the power of craving. The weight of failure shows us how tightly we bind our identity to outcomes. These realizations are not comfortable, but they are clarifying, and in their clarity lies freedom. Consider grief again. To love deeply is to risk loss, and the moment we experience that loss, we might wish we had armored ourselves, loved less, cared less, or kept a safe distance. But Buddhism reminds us that grief is not the enemy of love, it is its shadow. We grieve because we love, and in feeling grief fully, we see that love is not a possession that death can take away. It is a capacity that remains alive in us, even when its object has shifted. Suffering here becomes a teacher that instructs us in the difference between clinging to forms and honoring essence. The meaning of grief is not that life is cruel. The meaning is that life calls us to expand our love so that it includes memory, presence, and the shared vulnerability of all beings. Suffering also teaches us humility. Much of our modern world is built on illusions of control, control of the body, control of the future, control of reputation, control of environment. Suffering shatters these illusions. Illness reminds us that the body has its own fragility. Failure reminds us that outcomes are not solely in our hands. Aging reminds us that time does not bargain. When these truths press against us, the ego trembles. But if we meet them with curiosity instead of resistance, humility dawns. Humility is not self-deprecation. It is the spaciousness of recognizing that we are participants in a vast web of conditions, not masters of it. That spaciousness can soften our judgments of others and ourselves. The meaning of suffering, then, is that it levels us into kinship with the rest of humanity. Pain also brings us into the immediacy of the body. In ordinary life, we drift through habits, half asleep, numbed by routine. But when suffering sharpens, it interrupts that drift. A heartbreak makes the chest ache with real weight. A headache insists on presence. Anxiety quickens the pulse and squeezes the lungs. Though these sensations can be overwhelming, they can also be invitations to awaken to embodiment. In meditation practice, we learn to rest awareness gently in these very sensations, neither indulging nor suppressing them. We feel the heat of anger, the constriction of fear, the heaviness of sadness, not as enemies but as passing weather in the body. Slowly the body ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a teacher of impermanence, a teacher of patience, a teacher of the fact that we can stay present without being destroyed by what we feel. Beyond the individual, suffering connects us to others. Compassion is born when we realize that our pain is not unique. It is the shared texture of being alive. When we allow ourselves to truly feel suffering, we naturally recognize it in others. We see the exhaustion in a colleague's eyes, the unspoken ache in a stranger's voice, the tension in a friend's silence. Because we know suffering from the inside, we can respond with gentleness instead of indifference. This is why bodhisattva compassion in Buddhism is not sentimental pity. It is the recognition that your suffering is not separate from mine. Suffering becomes meaningful not only because it teaches us about ourselves, but because it makes us tender toward others. Finally, suffering reveals the limits of our strategies. We may spend years chasing distractions, wealth or validation, hoping they will anesthetize the ache. But eventually, suffering exposes the futility of these pursuits. This exposure is painful, but it is also liberating. It forces us to ask deeper questions. What is stable? What truly satisfies? What is worthy of my devotion? These questions can lead us toward the Dharma, toward practices that cultivate inner stability rather than outer dependency. Thus, suffering, when faced honestly, becomes the turning point toward awakening. To find meaning in suffering is not to glorify it or to wish for it. Buddhism does not ask us to seek pain, but to meet it when it comes with an open mind and heart. When we do, pain ceases to be merely destructive. It becomes alchemical. It transforms ignorance into insight, isolation into compassion, arrogance into humility, distraction into presence. And in that transformation, we discover the path to peace was hidden inside the very experiences we thought would break us. If this reflection helped you see suffering in a new light, and if you want to continue deepening in these teachings, subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking this path together. Compassion and interdependence, discovering peace through connection. If every event has meaning, then no event can be truly isolated, and no individual can be completely separate. Buddhism reveals this truth through the doctrine of interdependence. All phenomena arise in dependence on conditions, and nothing exists in isolation. This is not just a philosophical concept, it is the fabric of life itself. When we breathe, we are in relationship with trees and oceans. When we eat, we are in relationship with soil, sun, rain, farmers, transport workers, and countless beings. When we speak, we are shaping the inner world of another, and when they speak, they shape ours. To awaken to interdependence is to recognize that every event is a nexus of connections, and every connection carries meaning. From this recognition flows compassion, because to harm another is to harm ourselves, and to care for another is to participate in our own flourishing. Compassion in Buddhism is not a passive sympathy, but an active willingness to alleviate suffering wherever it appears. It arises naturally when we perceive interdependence clearly. Imagine walking in a forest and seeing a tree cut down. If we see that tree as an isolated object, its loss may not stir us deeply. But if we understand the tree as habitat for birds, as shade for travelers, as air for our lungs, as part of the larger web of life, then its loss touches us as our own. Likewise, when we see a person in pain, if we think of them as separate, we may judge or ignore them. But if we see their pain as echoing our own vulnerabilities, their suffering as part of the same human fragility we share, compassion awakens. In this way, meaning is woven into each event not by abstract reasoning, but by the living recognition of connection. Daily life offers countless opportunities to practice compassion. In conversation, when someone is harsh, we can pause to imagine the unseen suffering that fuels their words, perhaps exhaustion, fear, or loneliness. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it frames it in a way that opens the door to wise response instead of reactive retaliation. When we encounter a stranger struggling, a simple act, holding a door, offering a smile, giving attention, becomes meaningful because it affirms the shared dignity of being alive. Compassion transforms routine into practice. Cooking a meal becomes an act of care. Listening becomes an offering. Patience in traffic becomes a small gift to the collective field of stress we all inhabit. The practice of compassion also extends inward. Interdependence is not only external, it is internal. Our thoughts, emotions, and habits interconnect. An unkind thought toward ourselves can generate shame, which can fuel isolation, which can spiral into despair. Conversely, a moment of self-compassion, a gentle word to oneself in failure, a breath of patience when we fall short, can ease shame, open the heart, and ripple outward into kindness toward others. Many people believe compassion means always prioritizing others, but Buddhism insists that true compassion includes oneself. The more skillfully we meet our own suffering, the more authentically we can meet the suffering of others. To neglect ourselves is to misunderstand interdependence, for we too are part of the web that needs care. In meditation, compassion can be cultivated directly through practices such as metta, or loving kindness. We begin with ourselves, offering phrases of goodwill. May I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be at peace. Then we extend those wishes outward, to loved ones, to neutral acquaintances, to difficult people, and eventually to all beings without exception. This practice reshapes perception. It trains the heart to recognize connection even where resistance exists. It builds the muscle of goodwill so that in daily encounters, compassion arises spontaneously, without effort. Every event, an argument, a loss, a triumph, a mundane errand, becomes an opportunity to expand the circle of care. Compassion is also inseparable from wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion can become sentimentality, easily overwhelmed by the immensity of suffering in the world. But with wisdom, compassion is steady, resilient, and discerning. We learn to help in ways that truly alleviate rather than reinforce suffering. For example, enabling harmful behavior out of pity is not compassion, it is fear disguised as kindness. True compassion sees the long arc of well-being and is willing to speak truth or set boundaries when needed. Wisdom reminds us that compassion is not about fixing others, but about meeting them where they are, with clarity and love. In the larger scope, compassion reveals peace not as a solitary achievement, but as a collective state. One cannot be at peace while despising others, ignoring their pain, or hoarding resources. Peace blossoms in the recognition that our fates are entwined. When we ease another's burden, even in a small way, the atmosphere around us lightens, and our own hearts rest more easily. When we perpetuate harm, even in subtle ways, agitation echoes back into our own being. Interdependence means that the quality of our relationships, whether with people, animals, or the earth, directly influences the quality of our inner life. Thus, compassion is not optional if we seek inner peace. It is essential. To see that every event has meaning is to see that every encounter is an opportunity to cultivate compassion. A friend's success is a chance to practice sympathetic joy. A stranger's rudeness is a chance to practice patience. A child's laughter is a chance to practice gratitude. Even global crises, which may feel overwhelming, are chances to remember that our individual actions, how we consume, how we speak, how we treat others, contribute to the collective. In this way, every event is a call to embody the truth of connection. When compassion and interdependence are lived deeply, life ceases to be a series of isolated struggles and victories. It becomes a field of relationships in which every movement carries meaning. Peace, then, is not an escape from this field, but a skillful participation in it. The path to inner peace is not withdrawal from others, but the realization that caring for them is inseparable from caring for ourselves. If these reflections on compassion and interdependence resonate with you, and if you wish to continue exploring how connection can transform your life, subscribe to the channel now and join us in deepening this journey together. Impermanence and letting go, the freedom hidden in change. One of the most radical insights of Buddhism is impermanence. Anicca, the truth that all conditioned things arise, change, and pass away. Everything we cling to, whether pleasant or painful, is marked by transience. The body ages, emotions shift, relationships evolve, seasons turn, civilizations rise and fall. At first, this insight can feel bleak or unsettling. We long for stability, permanence, guarantees. We want the sweetness of love to last forever, the pain of grief to vanish immediately, the security of success to stay fixed. Yet the very fabric of reality resists this desire. Impermanence is not negotiable, but if every event has meaning, then impermanence itself must be a teacher. It teaches us how to let go, how to receive life as it is, and how to discover freedom not in holding on, but in flowing with change. Clinging is at the root of much of our suffering. We cling to identities. I am this kind of person, I cannot change. We cling to possessions, this is mine. Losing it would undo me. We cling to relationships. Without this person, I have no meaning. We even cling to pain. This story defines me. I will never be free. Each act of clinging is an attempt to resist impermanence, to freeze what is inherently fluid. But like holding sand too tightly, the more we grip, the more it slips away. When change inevitably arrives, our clinging turns natural transition into agony. Yet when we begin to see impermanence clearly, not as a threat but as truth, something shifts. Instead of clinging, we learn to dance. Instead of gripping, we learn to open. Instead of fearing change, we begin to sense the spaciousness it offers. Impermanence gives meaning to joy. If every sunrise were permanent, we would cease to notice it. If every embrace were endless, it would blur into numbness. It is precisely because each moment vanishes that it shines so brightly. Knowing the cup of tea will cool makes its first sip precious. Knowing the child will grow makes their laughter today sacred. Impermanence calls us into presence, reminding us that peace is not found in hoarding but in savoring. When we cling, we miss the moment because we are already trying to secure the next. When we let go, we meet the moment fully, and meaning blossoms in that meeting. Impermanence also softens pain. No matter how deep sorrow feels, it cannot remain unchanged. The waves rise, crash, and recede. Heartbreak, though sharp, gradually loses its edge. Anxiety, though loud, eventually ebbs. Even when grief revisits us years later, it returns in new forms. Sometimes gentle, sometimes piercing, but never identical. This flux is not betrayal, it is mercy. It means we are not trapped forever. To trust impermanence is to trust that pain will not consume us permanently, that healing is woven into the nature of things. Of course, the mind often argues, but this will never end. Here, mindfulness becomes crucial. By watching sensations moment to moment, we see that even within pain, micro-shifts are happening. This breath is softer, this thought is lighter, this ache has moved. Impermanence reveals itself in real time, teaching us that change is constant and therefore hope is always possible. The practice of letting go does not mean apathy or neglect. It means releasing the illusion of control over what cannot be held. We can love deeply while knowing loss will come. We can work diligently while knowing results will vary. We can care fiercely while knowing outcomes cannot be guaranteed. Letting go does not diminish love, work, or care. It deepens them. Because we no longer waste energy clinging, we can give ourselves more fully. A relationship lived with awareness of impermanence becomes more tender, not less, because we know every meeting could be the last. A project undertaken with humility toward change becomes more creative, because we are willing to adapt. A life lived with reverence for impermanence becomes radiant, because we see each moment as unrepeatable. Impermanence also dismantles the ego. The self we defend so vigorously, our preferences, achievements, wounds, is itself a flow. Who we were 10 years ago, or even yesterday, is not who we are today. Our body has renewed countless cells, our mind has shed and acquired ideas, our heart has expanded and contracted in countless ways. When we realize that I is not a fixed monument but a river, the desperate need to control how others see us begins to ease. We can allow ourselves to change without shame. We can forgive ourselves for past mistakes because the self who made them is not the same as the self who learns from them now. The meaning of impermanence here is profound. It frees us from the prison of identity, allowing us to evolve with compassion and honesty. Meditation offers a laboratory for this insight. As we sit quietly, we watch the breath rise and fall, thoughts emerge and dissolve, sensations flicker and fade. Nothing stays. Even the sense of me meditating comes and goes. At first, this instability can feel disorienting, but as we continue, it becomes liberating. We realize that clinging is unnecessary because change is natural, and in releasing clinging, peace arises. This peace is not numbness, it is vivid awareness, alive to each unfolding moment without the need to trap it. In the wider world, impermanence teaches us resilience. When societies change, when institutions collapse, when environments shift, we may panic if we expect permanence. But if we understand that all formations are transient, we can respond with creativity instead of despair. This does not mean passivity, it means grounded engagement. We work to reduce harm, to cultivate justice, to protect the vulnerable. Not because we believe we can freeze history into perfection, but because we know our actions ripple meaningfully in a stream that is always moving. Impermanence teaches us to do good without clinging to outcomes, to act with integrity regardless of results, to plant seeds without demanding to see the full harvest. Ultimately, letting go is not a loss, but a gain. What we lose is the exhaustion of resisting reality. What we gain is the serenity of alignment with it. When we let go of control, we gain trust. When we let go of resentment, we gain space. When we let go of fear, we gain courage. Letting go does not make life smaller. It makes it infinitely wider because it allows us to receive what actually is instead of clinging to what we wish would stay. To see impermanence is to see that every event is meaningful because every event is transient. Its meaning lies in its uniqueness. This moment has never been before and will never be again. By letting go, we honor that uniqueness. We do not strangle it with expectation. We allow it to live, and in allowing it to live, we find ourselves more alive too. If this teaching on impermanence spoke to your heart and reminded you of the freedom in letting go, subscribe to the channel now so we can continue exploring these truths together. The path of inner peace, integrating wisdom into daily life. The journey through mindfulness, suffering, compassion, and impermanence prepares the ground for the deepest flowering of the Buddhist path, inner peace. This peace is not a prize to be earned after a lifetime of struggle, nor is it a fragile mood that depends on circumstances aligning in our favor. It is a steady quality of being that arises when we live in harmony with reality. To discover inner peace, we must integrate the wisdom of the teachings into the fabric of everyday life, into how we think, speak, act, work, rest, love, and die. Every event becomes a chance to embody wisdom, and in embodying wisdom, peace becomes our home. Inner peace begins with clarity of mind. The mind, left untended, leaps restlessly from one thought to another, chasing desire, fleeing fear, rehearsing grievances, projecting into futures that may never come. This agitation is the opposite of peace, but through mindfulness and meditation, we learn to steady the mind. Like a lake stirred by wind, when attention calms, the waters become still and clear, reflecting the sky without distortion. This clarity does not mean thoughts vanish. It means thoughts lose their tyranny. We can see them as passing clouds rather than binding truths. In daily life, this clarity translates into freedom. When anger arises, we recognize it as anger and need not become its servant. When desire arises, we see it as desire and need not collapse into compulsion. Each recognition restores calm. Each calm moment builds trust in our capacity to live with ease. Peace also requires ethical living. The Buddha emphasized that inner peace is impossible without outer integrity. When our actions are harmful, when our words wound, when our livelihood exploits, the mind cannot rest. Guilt, fear of consequences, and inner conflict gnaw at us. But when we live ethically, practicing honesty, kindness, non-harming, generosity, the mind relaxes. We have nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Integrity becomes the ground of peace. Each ethical choice may seem small, refraining from a lie, showing patience, refusing cruelty, but each is a stitch in the fabric of inner freedom. The path of peace is not built on grand gestures. It is woven from the countless small alignments of thought, word, and deed with compassion and wisdom. Another dimension of peace is simplicity. Modern life often pulls us toward excess. Excess of possessions, excess of obligations, excess of stimulation. This excess agitates the mind and burdens the heart. Simplicity, in contrast, creates spaciousness. When we simplify, we discover we need less than we imagined. We choose fewer possessions but more presence, fewer distractions but more depth, fewer entanglements but more authenticity. Simplicity is not deprivation. It is freedom from clutter, both outer and inner, that obscures peace. Each event in life can be simplified by asking, what truly matters here? What brings ease, clarity, and kindness? The answers point us toward peace. Inner peace is also nourished by gratitude. Gratitude transforms ordinary events into meaningful ones. The breath becomes a gift, the meal becomes a blessing, the conversation becomes a treasure. Gratitude shifts focus from what is lacking to what is present, from scarcity to abundance. It does not deny suffering, but it balances suffering with recognition of what sustains us. A grateful mind cannot remain agitated for long. It softens, opens, and rests. To practice gratitude is to align with the truth of interdependence, that countless conditions support our life at every moment. Gratitude, then, is not a sentimental mood, but a profound recognition of reality, and in that recognition, peace takes root. Yet perhaps the deepest layer of inner peace is wisdom about selflessness. Much of our turmoil arises from defending the I, my opinions, my status, my achievements, my wounds. When we see that this I is not a fixed entity, but a fluid process, the need for constant defense dissolves. We can let go of winning arguments, proving worth, securing image. We can allow life to flow without taking everything personally. This selflessness is not erasure of individuality, but liberation from its tight grip. It allows us to participate in the world fully without being trapped by ego. In that release, peace flowers naturally, because the battles of me against the world are revealed as illusions. Peace does not mean passivity. A peaceful heart can still act with vigor, resist injustice, speak truth, and face difficulty. But it acts from steadiness, not reactivity, from clarity, not confusion, from love, not fear. This is why inner peace is the most radical form of strength. It is unshakable, not because it avoids storms, but because it knows how to stand in the center of them without losing balance. In the end, the Buddhist path to inner peace is not about escaping life, but about living it more intimately. It is about meeting every event, joyful, painful, mundane, as a teacher. It is about seeing meaning, not as something to be hunted in the distance, but as something revealed in presence. It is about realizing that peace is not given by the world, but cultivated in the heart, moment by moment, breath by breath. And so, if you have walked with me through these teachings and felt even a glimpse of that peace arise within you, I invite you to carry it into your life. Let each event, no matter how small, remind you of your capacity for clarity, compassion, and freedom. And if you want to continue nourishing this journey with us, subscribe to the channel and join a community of seekers dedicated to living with wisdom and peace. Together, we can keep discovering that indeed, every event has meaning. Walking the path forward. As we come to the close of this reflection on every event has meaning, the Buddhist path to inner peace, let us pause and return once more to the heart of the teaching. Nothing in life is wasted. Each joy and each sorrow, each success and each failure, each silence and each storm carries within it a lesson. The path is not somewhere far away. It is in the way you breathe when tension rises, in the way you listen when someone speaks their truth, in the way you release when life asks you to let go. Inner peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the presence of wisdom within challenge, the presence of compassion within chaos, the presence of clarity within confusion. Buddhism reminds us that to live is to practice. Mindfulness, compassion, impermanence, and letting go are not abstract concepts, but living tools meant to be carried into your day, into conversations, into decisions, into quiet moments, alone. When we begin to trust this path, we find that peace is not fragile after all. It is steady because it is rooted in reality. It is lasting because it does not depend on conditions outside of us, but on how we relate to those conditions within us. So as you continue on your journey, remember, every event has meaning because every event can awaken you. Let your life itself be the teacher. Let your heart be the ground of compassion. Let your mind rest in clarity, and let your steps be steady on the path of peace. If this journey resonated with you, and if you wish to keep exploring these truths with us, subscribe to the channel. By joining, you walk not only for yourself, but alongside others who are also seeking wisdom, clarity, and peace. Together, we can continue uncovering the meaning in every moment, and together we can nurture a world where peace is not only possible, but lived.